New Hampshire.
I thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank the senior senator from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe, for his leadership, along with Senator Levin, of working hand in hand to get the defense authorization done this year. And this is so important. I know all of us would like to have had a process where we could have an open amendment process here, but I know that the chairman, Senator Levin, and Senator Inhofe as well, they worked very hard, and we had this ready to go a long time ago. I thank you for your work on this. I thank you for your commitment, and I thank you for the way that you and Senator Levin have run this committee in a respectful, bipartisan manner. And as we look at the importance of the defense authorization and making sure that we get this done before we go home, we have to understand, with the threats we're facing around the world right now would not be the time for the first time in over 50 plus years not to pass the defense authorization, given what it means to support for our men and women in uniform, their readiness, their equipment, the training, the support for their families, military construction, investment in technology that they need to keep us safe. So I want to thank you, Senator Inhofe, for your work on this. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank Senator Levin, who is retiring this year, for being an incredible chairman of this committee. I have to say this has been one of the best experiences I've had since I've gotten to the United States Senate. I've been here for 4 years, and Senator Levin has conducted this committee and treated everyone with respect. He has gotten us all to work together, where almost every year we've passed out the defense authorization almost unanimously. How often does that happen? And most times unanimously in a divided Congress. And I want to wish Senator Levin the best, because he's been so knowledgeable, so committed to ensuring that our nation is safe and to our men and women in uniform. But on a personal note, he has been so respectful to me, and someone who I think has run the committee so very well, has served our country with such dignity and such dedication, and I wish he and his wife Barbara the best in the future, but he is someone who this body will miss, and certainly as the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, who has treated everyone on both sides of the aisle with incredible respect, given us opportunities to raise issues that are important to us. And I think he's a model of how you should conduct yourself, and that you can disagree with each other, but still find ways and common ground that you can work together to get things done for the American people. And I come to the floor today to discuss the defense authorization and the provisions in it that are so important to not only my home state of New Hampshire, but to the country, and to also address some of the provisions that I want us to keep an eye on as we go forward. With skill and courage, our men and women in uniform are doing their job, and it's essential that we do our job as well. And in a time of war, we cannot neglect our constitutional duty to provide for the common defense. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, I have been privy to many briefings, as I know the President has as a member of this committee, about the threats facing our country and the needs of our men and women in uniform, the concerns that we have of ensuring that our troops are ready and that we are prepared to address potential threats to the country. In this bill, my home state of New Hampshire, we are a state that is very dedicated to serving, just as the President's state of Virginia is very dedicated to serving. There are many provisions in this bill that I've introduced and supported that I'm proud of, that'll make a difference to our national security, to our men and women in uniform, and I would like to talk about some of those provisions. In terms of supporting our troops and our families, it's very important that we pass this bill every year, because it authorizes expiring benefits for our troops that if we don't reauthorize, they would expire, including dozens of specific special and incentive pays for our troops and their families, particularly those who are serving us overseas and facing great danger as we stand here today. The defense bill also authorizes more than a dozen provisions to enhance protections for victims of sexual assault, and extends to the Secretary of the VA the authority to provide rehabilitation and vocational benefits to service members with severe illnesses and injuries. It also strengthens the Department of Defense's suicide prevention efforts, which unfortunately is happening to too many of those who have served our nation, and an issue that we are so concerned about on a bipartisan basis. The bill also authorizes $6.3 billion for needed military construction and family housing projects, including among that authorization is military construction projects at Pease Air National Guard Base in New Hampshire to prepare for the arrival of the KC-46A, not to mention a very important energy conservation project at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, and the shipyard has continued to invest in energy conservation and to save taxpayer dollars while doing so, and I'm pleased that that is included in this bill. The defense bill also maintains critical close air support for our troops in that it ensures that the Air Force cannot prematurely retire the A-10 aircraft in the fiscal year 2015. And having traveled to Afghanistan and heard directly from our men and women on the ground, I know how important it is that they have the very best close air support to keep them safe. The bill also authorizes continued funding for the Virginia-class 10-boat multi-year procurement program, including 2 in fiscal year 2015, which is very important because keeping this production and procurement program on track, and I know that the President shares this concern, will help achieve savings in excess of 15% as compared to just purchasing 1 a year. So it makes cost sense, and we need to continue to invest in our attack submarine program. With the help of the skilled workers at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, these submarines will protect vital shipping lanes and U.S. national security interests around the world for decades to come. And with the administration's discussion of a shift to the Asia-Pacific and the importance of that area of the world to our economy and our interests, our attack submarine fleet is so critical in meeting our needs around the world. These measures that are included in this bill will help ensure that Portsmouth and Pease remain invaluable national security assets, and I'm so proud of the members of our Guard and also everyone who serves at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard and the incredible workers that do the maintenance there of our attack submarine fleet. The bill also includes provisions of never contracting with the enemy. This is legislation which I have previously introduced that has allowed our military to ensure that dollars don't flow to our enemies. So when we're contracting in places like Afghanistan, we've given them tools to cut off contracts sooner to make sure that the contracts aren't going to the wrong people. This legislation will extend those authorities across the federal government. So to USAID, to State Department, to ensure that our taxpayer dollars don't go to people who are acting against our interests. And so I appreciate USAID and State Department in working with me on this legislation, and I'm very glad it's included in these provisions. These are some of just a few of the positive examples of the importance of this defense authorization bill. There are many, many other important provisions in this bill, and that's why it's important that we get this done today or tomorrow. There are 2 areas of issues that I want to address briefly that I am a little concerned about on this bill. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I'm married to a veteran, I plan to vote for this bill because of the positive components of it. But one area that I'm concerned with is that we're again looking at the compensation, and we're looking at the housing allowances of our men and women in uniform. And it reminds me a little bit, it's not an exact analogy, of when we had the budget agreement over a year ago, there was an adjustment made to the cost of living increases, and it was a cut, really, in the military retirement of some of those who have served our country. And I was someone who came to the floor to reverse this reduction to the cost of living increases that for some of our men and women in uniform who had served so admirably would have cost them up to $80,000 a year in their retirement. And we're talking about enlisted who've worked so hard, and that would make such a big difference on. And one of the reasons I came in that regard to fight against what was included in the budget agreement is because there seemed to be a disconnect. That budget agreement made changes to civilian retirement in it, but only prospectively to those who were just joining the retirement program. When it came to making the cuts to the military retirement and to their cost of living, it was affecting current recipients. And so there seemed to be a disconnect. How could we ask those who have given the most and have sacrificed so much to defend us and ask them to make a sacrifice when we were treating other civilian employees differently? And I'm glad that the Congress reversed that. So one thing that came out of that is I think just we need to have a greater understanding here of the unique sacrifices that our men and women in uniform make, and the sacrifices that they make that are different than other workers, where the traveling that they do, the danger that they face, that often a spouse can't have a second career because they're constantly moving. And so since 2000, collectively as the Congress, we've worked hard to correct the pay and benefit structure for those who wear the uniform to close what was a 13.5% gap between the private sector and what our men and women in uniform were getting. We eliminated out-of-pocket housing expenses that used to be 20% and expanded military health care for retired military personnel over the age of 65. But as I look at the provisions of this bill, I don't want us to erode the work that we have done to recognize our men and women in uniform and the positions and the danger that they face. In this bill, generally the dollar amounts associated with the provisions I'm concerned about are much smaller than those involved with the COLA debate early this year. But again, we're back looking toward our men and women in uniform in several areas. These problematic provisions relate to the compensation and health benefits for our service members and their families. More specifically, they relate to the basic allowance for housing, or BAH, TRICARE pharmacy copays, and basic pay for our service members. BAH is currently designed to cover 100% of the service members' monthly housing costs. The BAH provision in this NDAA will allow the Secretary of Defense to reduce BAH payments so that they only cover 99% of service members' monthly housing costs. Now, obviously, that is a small reduction, but it's the significance of the reduction that I'm concerned about, that we can't keep going down this road where we're trying to choose between military readiness and making sure that our men and women in uniform have this full support that they need in terms of compensation and support for their families. And that's why I'm concerned about this provision. And in terms of pharmacy copays, while the Pentagon's budget request, it's important to understand, they requested a much greater increase in future years in copays than this body would accept, that the Armed Services Committees would accept. The negotiated NDAA would still permit a $3 pharmacy copay increase for non-active duty TRICARE beneficiaries who fill prescriptions outside military treatment facilities. So Congress has worked hard to close the military-civilian pay gap, but this year's NDAA is once again set to give our military only a 1% pay raise for the second straight year. I believe our military service members deserve a higher pay raise, and I will continue to push for that in the future, and I hope it's something that we can work together on, because we have to keep up with inflation for our men and women in uniform. It's very, very important. One of the reasons it's important is that they are our greatest treasure. The reason we have such a wonderful military, we can have the very best equipment, we can have the greatest technology, but the reason we have the best military in the world are because of our great men and women in uniform. And we can never lose sight of that. We can never lose sight of the importance of our all-voluntary force. And I think that as we look at where we are with defense spending, one thing that very much concerns me is the incoming impact of sequester again in 2016 and 2017. So it is my hope that this body will understand and work together in addressing sequester for our defense, because I see us continuing to be in a situation where we are left, where our military leaders come to us and ask us to take from the men and women in uniform in a way that is unacceptable because they're facing sequester, they're worried about the readiness of our troops, and they're concerned that they won't be able to provide the equipment and training that our troops need to meet the threats that we are facing around the world and to ensure that our men and women in uniform never become part of a hollow force. And so, Mr. President, I know you serve on the Armed Services Committee with me. It is my hope as we look at this NDAA that we don't set a precedent where we're continuing to look for to take from our military, that we continue and we look to how we can work together to address sequester in the coming years, because there's a big disconnect of where we are right now if we impose sequester in 16 and 17 with the threats we face around the world, with what our men and women in uniform need to address those threats and to keep this country safe, and what they deserve in terms of our support, given what we are asking them to do. And they are the very best, and they go out and do it on our behalf every single day. And so it is my hope that we can work together. I've addressed these issues in my additional views to the 2015 defense authorization, and it is my hope that we will recognize the treasure that is our men and women in uniform going forward, that we will cut through the partisan politics on this, that we will address sequester, and that our men and women in uniform know that we will continue to stand by them. This defense authorization is important, but it also prefaces the challenges we face coming forward in 2016 and 2017, which I believe we will not be able to meet fully unless we come together and address sequester. So, Mr. President, I thank you. The defense authorization, we do need to get it done today. I think there are provisions that are very important for our national security. The issues that I've addressed of concern today, I hope we aren't addressing again next year. I hope we can correct them and make sure that we're giving the men and women in uniform a pay raise that's better than this year. And I hope that together we can continue to work on a bipartisan basis in the Armed Services Committee, as Chairman Levin has championed, as Senator Inhofe, as the ranking member, has as well. And I look forward to doing that in the future. Thank you, Mr. President.